I'm going to take you through one thread of a journey that's 40 years and $74 million. But first I'm going to set a little bit of background so you get the full context. So in 1907, the Pike Place market was established, and it was about the price of onions. Right? Farmers were not getting a fair price from the wholesalers, and consumers were paying too much. So the city of Seattle established a farmers market right on Pike Place. And it went really, really well until the 50s and suburbanization. And the market was slated for demolition. They were going to tear it completely down, replace it with high-rises, bowling alleys, and movie theaters. And there was a local movement led by Victor Steinbrueck, this gentleman right here, and remember that name, Steinbrueck, and they saved the market. So in the early 70s, they put in place this very quirky governance structure to manage the Pike Place market. I'm the director of the PDA, the Preservation and Development Authority. We own most of the property in the historic district. I answer to a 12-member council, lots of politics. We have about 15 buildings, have over 100 employees, and how many of you are familiar with commercial leasing? Any of you? You know the location, location, location premise, right? That's the most valuable thing. Right after that, when you look at your lease document, the most valuable thing is what you can use that space for. When I took this job, I turned to our form lease, turned to the use provision, and it said, "See Historic Commission approval." So we own all the property, but we can make no decisions about how it's used. That lies in the hands of yet another governing body, the Historic Commission, and it goes much deeper than that. They dictate what light bulbs we use, what paint colors, and what bricks, right? Intentional separation of powers to ensure that the Pike Place Market PDA, as the landlord, does not default to pure economics as the highest and best use, that we are constantly working to preserve the history of our city. There's also the constituency. They appoint 4 of my bosses. You have the Merchants Association. There's actually 2. There was a fissure in the 90s, and so one split off and formed another one. You have the Daystall Tenants Association. There's a whole ordinance that governs how we assign table space throughout the market on the north end every single day. And then you have Friends of the Market, which is the organization that was established by Victor Steinbrueck. Throughout that, we have 250 small businesses, over 220 craftspeople, 84 farmers, and hundreds of residents that live throughout the market. And pretty much everywhere 1 story above Pike Place is an apartment, and most of those apartments are for low-income seniors. We also have a host of social services, a medical clinic, a senior center, a food bank, and a preschool. And 2 piggy banks. They raise a lot of money for these social services. In fact, they raised a lot more once we put a sign up above Rachel under the clock and sign that said what Rachel does. Of course, we forgot to get Historic Commission approval, so they told us to take that sign down. We had 30 days until the hearing, so we did a comparison of the money we raised the 30 days prior to the sign went up and the 30 days that the sign was up. We raised twice as much money. We presented that to Historic Commission. After 15 minutes of deliberation, they decided it was okay for us to leave the sign as long as we made a few modifications. And we have 10 million visitors a year. So it's with this backdrop that we had a tremendous opportunity and also a real concern. We're constantly watching the world changing around us and trying to figure out how to respond. So the viaduct is coming down. How many of you still question that? Bertha is literally 200 yards from completion. The viaduct is going to come down. And the city of Seattle came up with a grand vision for a great new waterfront when the viaduct gets torn down. They hired a New York designer, James Corner, brilliant designer, involved in the High Line in New York, and he came up with a plan. We're going to take the grand waterfront, we're going to run it right up over a parcel that we call PC1 North at the time, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment, and right across what's known as Victor Steinbrueck Park. And we're going to redo all of it. So, you can imagine, this was a pretty significant threat to the market. This is Steinbrueck Park, also known as Native Park, named after Victor, pretty important guy for us. This is PC1 North. This is the last parcel in the historic district that we've been trying to develop for 40 years since the market was saved in the 1970s. So, tremendous opportunity. But how do you mobilize a community that's focused on preservation and protection to move toward change? First, there's timing. And we got really lucky. Demolition of the viaduct, waterfront plan, there was city funding. We were in incredible financial position. My predecessor was a wizard of an accountant, and she ensured that the PDA had adequate resources and was prepared for a future. And we had a long-standing effort to develop this site. So the first thing I did was dove in and looked at our history. And this may sound illogical, but that actually allowed us to move very fast. These are the pages from the 1974 Urban Renewal Plan, and they talk about the priority uses for PC1 North. We want parking, we want commercial, we want residential space. And it eliminated a good 6 to 12 months of Seattle process, because we had agreed to this in the 70s, and we reaffirmed it in the 80s, and we looked at it again in the 90s, and I pulled all those out and showed everybody. We need to move now to a concept design. So just a quick review of the site, and remember this right here. This is a cabin, and this is the outhouse. 1909. 1973, this is when the market was saved. There was a building on this site. It was called the Municipal Market. It's where Bavarian Meats started. 1974, the building caught fire. We also weren't wearing seatbelts, right? We threw the empty beer cans in the back of the station wagon, and we stood on bridges connected to burning buildings. After the building was torn down, that's how it sat until June of 2015. You have to constantly assess your risk anytime you're taking on a project. And we, as a preservation and historic district, are tremendously risk averse. So I showed you all of the input, all of the community members, lots of voices in this process, lots of governance, lots of bureaucracy. You'd think that would be enough. Underneath this site is a Burlington Northern train tunnel. It runs from the south side to the north side on a diagonal. It was hand dug in the early 1900s. It is the main north-south line for Burlington Northern. We couldn't stop it, we couldn't break it, but we had to get as close as we could to get our parking in that helps support the project. We had tunnel monitoring equipment in the tunnel for 9 months. And it was only once the final grade and the final slab for the garage was poured and cured that Burlington Northern finally said, "You're good." Why is that important? Up until that point, they could have stopped us at any juncture in the project. This was a known risk. Then there's a community process. You have to plan and you have to listen. So the first 4 images are the first draft from Miller Hall. An incredible architect, did a fantastic job for us. Everybody found a reason to hate all 4 of those options. So we had a meeting, and this was a really important meeting. We were going to decide how to move forward with design on this project. We had 64 people in attendance. We had 4 television stations, several print reporters, and a radio station. And the council debated this in front of the entire community, and we settled on option BB, and with an amendment, BB plus, that allowed us to get 1 extra story of housing. And this was the beginning of over 200 public meetings. That's where this was the main item on the agenda, a main topic of discussion, followed by 24 briefings of the Historic Commission. That last briefing where I got their approval was 2 hours and 45 minutes. The last 15 minutes, how many of you have heard of the charms? You can get your name on a charm, it hangs on the fence. I'll show you an image in a moment. They spent the last 15 minutes measuring the font size of the donor recognition on the charm, and one condition of approval was that the font size couldn't be higher than a 1/4 inch, give or take a 1/16. So tremendous public process. No joke. We did this all including the public. And why is that important? Every member of the public that engaged in this project and was a regular attendee at our meetings can see something in this that was their idea. The angle of this roof that preserves views from the west end of the market where the Daystall is set up today. The glass garage doors that preserve the views. The commercial hall that echoes components of the market today, heavy timber construction, a celebration of the producer. We have a chocolate maker, a biscuit maker, a brewery, and a Spanish seafood restaurant that's going to smoke and cure fish. access and portals through, right? The market's about discovery. So in this project, you can see that sense of discovery. You can see the destination you want to go, and there's surprises. And a residential building that has units for 40 low-income seniors. We've moved in 22 people. 12 of them were homeless right before they moved into this space. And even here, the architect came and presented the final design for the interiors of the residential to our council. The council chair turned to me and said, "Ben, what did Howard think?" Who's Howard? Howard's a very large man, very loud man, in an electric wheelchair that lives in one of our low-income senior units, and he has attended every single meeting for 5 years. Howard got to choose the color palette for the interior of the residence. And why is all that important in the community process? When we presented this whole project to the City Council to get approval for $34 million in city funding, we got a unanimous vote. Because we had embraced the entire community. They understood the risks, they understood what the opportunity was, and more importantly, they had ownership because they could see their ideas. The last thing we did was made sure we didn't wait for Bertha. We designed this to build while the viaduct was still in place. So just about 2 years ago, we started construction right here, and we went fast. We started excavating. We were making great progress. And then I took Peter Steinbrück on a tour of the site, Victor's son, former council member. We were walking through, and he said, "Hey, Ben, did you find any bottles, any old stuff in the mud?" I said, "Yeah, let's go to the construction trailer. Let me show you what we found." He takes some pictures. He goes home. He posts it on Facebook. 48 hours later, I get a call from the State Office of Archaeology saying, "Mr. Franz-Knight, it appears that you have missed a permit step." Now, I have my historic preservation permit from the Office of Historic Preservation, which is in the same building as the Office of Archaeology, in the same department in Olympia. They don't talk to each other. "Have you found anything on the site?" she says. "Well, we found a few things. I've been told by our archaeologists it's mostly garbage." I hear a fist hit the desk. "Mr. Franz-Knight, this is not garbage. This is our state's history." And I immediately realize I am in big trouble. "What do you need us to do? I am so sorry we have missed a step. You need to get archaeologists on site monitoring every bit of soil immediately, starting tomorrow at 8 a.m. We will be on site in 1 week." Fantastic. I get archaeologists on site. 8 hours later, they uncover a shell midden. They uncover shoes. They start finding artifacts. Remember the photo from 1907? Early 1900s, the cabin and the outhouse? Right here, they find a little 4-by-4-foot wooden box. I've been given this presentation with the image from the early 1900s quite a few times. They can't figure out what it is. I say, "I'll be right back, hold on." I go print out a slide. Indeed, it's the privy. It's the outhouse. We have found the base of the outhouse that's in the middle of that photo. The archaeologists get incredibly excited. Why? Because if you drop something in the privy, you didn't go after it. They tend to be artifact rich. So, we found over 2,000 artifacts. I think the favorite one is this doll head right here. It rolled out of the dirt on Halloween and terrified the archaeologists. They took it back, they did their research, they found out it's a German ceramic doll, and the model name is indeed Bertha. So we found Bertha. So you want to move fast, right? When you are trying to change something, you're trying to get somewhere, but you can't be reckless, right? You can't be reckless. When you run into an obstacle, you have to understand it, you have to correct it, and then you can move forward again. So this was the site in January of 2016. Incredibly complicated infrastructure going over the top of the Burlington Northern Train Tunnel. Everybody is watching, so this is being constructed in a fishbowl. When the archaeologists taped off an area with yellow tapes, everybody's like, "There was a murder on site." Like, no, they found bones. We don't know if they're human yet. It turns out they were cow bones. It's fine. Interestingly, on the archaeology note, we discovered there were two populations living on this site in the early 1900s. One was a group of squatters on the north end of the site, and the archaeologists could tell because they had poor cuts of meat. The other group of workers were the engineers for the Burlington Northern Train Tunnel. It was one of the greatest engineering feats of the day, and they were feeding them incredibly well, and they had the finest cuts of meat. Pretty interesting discovery. So this was the site in 2016. This is the site just in January of this year. In the end of February, we started moving people into the residential building. Just this morning, we got approval from the fire marshal for temporary occupancy of the garage and the commercial space. So 40 units of housing, 300 parking spaces, 10,000 square feet of commercial space, and then an amazing new plaza right here that extends off the Desmond Bridge and celebrates the incredible views going down to the south and has a connection that provides for the future of the waterfront. So just earlier this week, I was sitting in a room with all the waterfront partners, folks from the aquarium, City of Seattle, city leaders that started this vision for the new central waterfront that we responded to 4 years ago. They can't wait to stand with us on June 29th with the mayor, cut the ribbon, and celebrate this project as the catalyst for ensuring that the central waterfront vision gets realized. We went from responding to change and to a threat to becoming the catalyst for realizing a great vision for our city. So with change comes great opportunity and a few challenges. Thank you.